So welcome back, everyone. We are continuing our discussion on how to motivate employees. Okay, so just to recap, we defined motivation as the psychological processes that arouse and direct goal-directed behavior. And what motivation does really, it answers the question of why do people do the things that they do. And I think that this graphic really sort of gets at how motivation works. According to this graphic, we begin with a unfulfilled need, right? There's a desire that's created to fulfill that need. So motivation is your search for ways to satisfy that need. That results in behaviors that you engage in that you think might satisfy the need, and you receive some kind of reward for that behavior, which is going to satisfy that need. Right? So underlying the drive for motivation is some unfulfilled need you have a desire to fill. And as I mentioned, which is again a recurring theme throughout this course, that people are going to respond to motivation in different ways, right? And so people differ, and because of those differences, people are not going to react to different motivational techniques in the same way. And last week was dedicated to ways in which people differ and how that affects their behavior, right? And so all of that is going to apply here as well. It's going to apply to motivation. People are going to have different personal factors that are going to affect to the degree to which they're motivated, what kinds of motivation they will respond to. People are going to have different contextual factors, which will also impact the degree to which people respond to different kinds of motivations. And of course, not only the way in which they respond to different motivational techniques, but the things that they are motivated by, right? People are going to have all different kinds of desires. And so what I presented last week was a way of integrating all of the motivation theories that you read about in the chapter. And because one of the most important questions in trying to understand motivation is that if motivation is that sort of psychological drive to fill an unfulfilled need, right? It's that desire to fill an unfulfilled need. It begs the question, what are those unfulfilled needs that people have? Because this is what you need to know if you're going to be successful in generating any kind of motivation within people. And so what I suggested is that there's three ways in which we interface with and experience reality. Those three ways are psychological, social, and behavioral/physical, right? Those are the three sort of major ways in which we will experience reality. And ultimately, what we are motivated to do is to maximize our positive experiences and minimize the negative ones within each of them, right? And so we have a desire to have positive psychological experiences. We have a desire to have positive social experiences, and we have a desire to have positive behavioral and physical experiences. And the degree to which you can provide those positive experiences is the degree to which you will be able to motivate people, right? Because they will see that as a source for fulfilling those unfulfilled desires to have each of those positive experiences. And of course, in order for all of that to work, right, if you come up with a positive experience that you want to use to motivate someone, that someone needs to be aware that that positive experience exists. And they need to have a belief that they'll be able to do whatever it is that they need to do in order to have that experience, right? They need to complete the test to get the reward, whatever it may be. And so what I suggested is that the value then that all of these motivation theories have is that they can be ideas for ways to generate those positive experiences within each of those ways we interface with reality. They can be used as ideas for generating positive psychological experiences, positive physical experiences, or behavioral experiences, and positive social experiences. And so these are the list of theories that we went over in sort of like the first half of the motivation chapter. And again, I mean, it seems as if it's just sort of like a random collection, of a bunch of needs, right? That these theorists sort of slapped together in a haphazard way and called it a theory. A lot of this doesn't have scientific evidence to support many of their claims, right? So all of motivation, even just all of work motivation, is not going to be reduced to any set of 3 needs that people have. So one theory alone is not going to be enough in order to successfully motivate people to do the things that they need to do. Using these theories as a source to draw from as far as ideas and ways you can motivate people in those different categories, I created this sort of chart to illustrate that, right? And so you have each of your 3 ways that you integrate with the reality that you experience: psychological, social, behavioral, physical, right? And we can draw some of these elements that each of these theories provide and can sort of categorize each of them, right? And so here you have now a list of ways to generate positive experiences in each of these categories. And then your job really is just to design jobs to deliver those positive experiences in each of those categories. And of course, the things that you're going to be required to motivate people to do is at first to join your organization, right? You're going to be in competition with other companies to attract the very best talent, right? So you want to motivate people to join your organization rather than a competition. Once they join, you want to motivate them to stay. So you want to make sure it's as positive experience as possible so that they stick with you and don't take their skills and knowledge to the competition. You want to motivate them to show up for work. You also want to obviously motivate them to be engaged, which will lead to an increase in productivity while they're at your organization. You also want to motivate workers to do extra for your organization, so to motivate those citizenship behaviors. And so job design really is designing jobs that generate these kinds of experiences. So designing the job in a way that it produces these positive experiences along these 3 different categories so that you can maximize the motivation that each of the workers have. And there's a couple of ways of thinking about job design that the textbook mentions, right? So job enlargement would be a way of just increasing the number of tasks so that the variety of tasks that a worker performs increases, and that will increase motivation. And then job enrichment, which is just building more motivational factors within the current tasks that they already perform. So the chapter continues with additional motivational theories, and I will introduce them because these will probably be theories that you will encounter in the future. So it's good to know what they are. This is a very popular one. It's very popular among both scholars and management practitioners. And this is the job characteristics model. And the basic idea is that there are 5 core job characteristics, and these job characteristics will generate 3 psychological states, and these states lead to improved work outcomes. And so the 5 characteristics are skill variety, task identity, task significance, and those 3 combine to create a more meaningful work experience. So skill variety is obvious. That's being able to do different tasks. It was once believed that if you maximize the simplicity of the job, if you make the job as simple as possible, right, then they will get better and better at that task. So that will increase their performance at the test. They'll become more productive as a result. But really that's treating people, and this is sort of, early attempts at trying to motivate people without a lot of knowledge about human behavior and the way that people respond to different ways of motivating them. And this is just not effective because people will get bored, right? We're thinking of people in terms of machinery when we think that they will be able to respond effectively to this, and it just doesn't work. So a better approach is actually to increase the variety of tasks that they perform, because that's going to increase the degree to which they are engaged at their job. It'll keep their interest. Task identity. This sort of goes back to the Marxist concept of alienation. This was a complaint that Marx had with the capitalist system, because it used to be, prior to capitalism and the division of labor, we had workers who worked as craftsmen. And a craftsman would be someone who makes an entire product, right? So from beginning to end, and they'll make all aspects of that product, right? And so, I don't know if they're making baskets, right? They will make the whole basket. They'll make the bucket part, right? They'll make the handle, they'll attach the handle, right? And so the thinking is that there's a certain level of satisfaction that you get when you can see how your work impacts the final product, right? And so it makes the job more meaningful for you. And so an increase in task identity is an increase in the way, to the degree to which a worker can see how their work contributes to the final product. And so task identity is a good thing. It adds to the meaningfulness that they will experience. And then task significance is about how the work that you perform impacts others. And so the more your work impacts the work of others, the more significant that work is. And the more significant it is, the more meaningful it will make the job for you. Autonomy is something we've encountered before in several other theories. Here, so an increase in autonomy according to the job characteristics model is necessary because it enables them to experience responsibility for work outcomes, and this will generate greater degrees of satisfaction in the work that they do. And then the last category is feedback. And so that will lead to knowledge of actual results. So you'll get the satisfaction of knowing how well you did. And so the value here, again, I think is these are aspects that can generate a positive experience, a positive work experience. So, there are ways in which, you can think about in designing a job to generate those positive experiences. And again, I don't think it's all that valuable to memorize, what the 5 characteristics are. Just know that this is what the job characteristics model talks about. And it's yet another set of ways that you can generate positive experiences. And so a new category of theories is reinforcement theories, reinforcement perspectives on motivation. And according to these reinforcement perspectives, they suggest that behavior with positive consequences tends to be repeated, whereas behavior with negative consequences tends not to be repeated. And this comes out of the work that was initially pioneered by B.F. Skinner, a famous psychologist. This is all about behavior modification. Now, his work on what's known as operant conditioning, where you just reinforce behaviors that you want, was done with animals, and animals are going to respond to these kinds of techniques differently than people do, right? Because people act in a much more sophisticated way in the world, right? We have this rational capacity that works in tandem, with our instincts and emotions and reflexes that can override a lot of these very simple reinforcements that Skinner performed with animals. But so I don't know that you can ever generate the results in human beings that Skinner was able to generate in animals, but it does tell us a little bit something about how the positive experiences that you deliver, how those positive experiences should be delivered. And so I'll get into that here. And the basic idea, according to reinforcement theory, is that obviously you only want to reward desirable behavior, but also what you want to do is you want to give rewards as soon as possible. And you want to be clear about what behavior is desired. And of course, there's differences, individual differences among workers, so they're going to respond to rewards in different ways. So, monetary rewards may work for one person, but compliments or just recognition may work better for another. So recognize that those differences exist. And so the kinds of rewards that you're going to give may work differently for different employees. There's a whole punishment section here that's mentioned. There will be occasions where punishment is necessary, but this should be, only used as a absolute last resort. The approach that you want to take that is most effective, particularly in dealing with behavior that you want to discourage, is to take a coaching approach, and we've talked about this in the past, right? So you want to emphasize ways in which people can improve the things that they're doing, right? Improve at their job. And so you want to focus really on getting people on the path towards improving as an employee, rather than emphasizing and stressing the places where they go wrong. So something that will work well with reinforcement theory is compensation. And so we talked a little bit about compensation in the first half of this lecture when we talked about equity. So that's really one of the more important features when you're talking about compensation. You want to make sure that the process is just, right? So you want to make sure that the amount that people are getting paid is considered fair, right? And you want to make sure that the way in which you calculate how people are awarded is thought to be fair. And when you allocate these rewards, you want to do it in a way that is also just. And so this is part of the justice theory, which we covered last week. And so all of these are important aspects when you design any kind of compensation plan. But compensation is a way to put reinforcement theory to work, because there's different ways in which you can compensate people. And so there's, several ways listed here. So the way in which you pay people according to reinforcement theory is going to have an overall impact on the degree to which it will be motivating, right? And so an example of this is you can just look at education. So there's been lots of studies done on how students respond to compensation. And a lot of these early studies showed that it had a very minimal effect. But then there was a recent study done at Harvard where the previous studies, the kinds of compensation plans that they would use to see its effect on how it motivates students would be things like they'll give them like a scholarship when they graduate, or if they perform well on a standardized test, they'll be given like $100. And the problem, and we know this because of our understanding of the way people respond to motivations, particularly reinforcement theory, is that you want to, and let's go back to here, you want to give the rewards as soon as possible, right? And you want to be clear about what behavior is desired. And when you give a reward a year after the desired behavior, it's going to have a minimal effect, right? And so it's not going to be very effective as a way to motivate students when you're paying them at the end of the school year. And so there was a recent study, maybe a couple of years ago now, where they paid students an amount that they cared about. So it wasn't a minimal amount. It wasn't $100 at the end of the year. And they paid them immediately for work that they would do. And it had a massive effect. And so the difference between all of the previous studies, which showed that students don't really respond to monetary incentives, and this study, which did show that not only do they respond to monetary incentives, but it has a massive motivating effect, was the way in which the reward was administered, right? And so you want to reward behaviors that are desired. And then here in this study, they rewarded people for completing work rather than grades, right? And so you want students not necessarily to get a great grade, but you want them to do the behaviors that are necessary for them to get that grade, right? And so to complete their homework, to complete their readings, to do the problem sets, etc. And when they were compensated for doing that, and they were compensated immediately for doing that, and not at the end of the year. And of course, they were compensated in a way that they cared about, right? So it was an amount of money that they cared about, that they desired, right? That was meaningful for them. Then it did actually have a very large effect. So we talked a little bit about this, non-monetary ways of motivating employees, and I'll end it on this section. So the basic idea here is that the way in which you want to think about the most effective ways to motivate people is you want to generate these positive experiences, positive psychological, social, and behavior/physical experiences. And so that's what motivating people is all about, right? So we just need to get clear that that is the goal, right? That this is what at the most fundamental level is what drives people to behave, to act, right? To get out of bed in the morning. This is the purpose, the meaning behind each of our lives, that we are seeking out these positive experiences. Positive psychology is an academic discipline that developed over the past decade or so that studies specifically this. How do you generate or how do you maximize well-being rather than what psychology used to traditionally do, which is focusing on just what is wrong with people, right? And so rather than focusing just on what's wrong with people, psychology took this turn. Well, you know, some researchers within psychology took this turn and looked to see, you know, how can we maximize the well-being of someone rather than fixing whatever deficits that they had. And so this is a very big research area, positive psychology. But one of sort of the results that came from this is this idea that in order to maximize someone's well-being, you want them to what they call flourish. And to flourish, you need to impact these 5 elements. And so what they list here is the 5 elements are captured in the acronym PERMA, which is just positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement, right? And so you can think of these as substantial ways to generate these positive experiences in each of those important categories, right? The psychological, social, and physical behavioral. This is an effort to determine, you know, what are the most impactful experiences we can generate in each of those categories. And so it might be a good starting place when you think about whether a job is maximally producing these positive experiences. You probably want to focus on these 5 elements. And, you know, obviously doing that is going to maximize the positive experiences and obviously maximize motivation. And you see recurrent themes here. So positive emotions is any kind of positive psychological experience that we listed several in the past in the first part of this lecture. Engagement is another, and there's a whole, you don't need to know this for this course, but if this is something that interests you, there's this whole idea called flow that people experience when they are maximally engaged in the work that they're doing. People often experience this when they're gaming. So any of you who are into like video games, you can experience it then, this state of flow where you're totally, you know, tuned into what you're doing to the point where like you lose track of where you are, you lose track of time, and that experience of flow is a very positive experience. And the idea is you want to be able to replicate something like that within a job. People also experience it who are creative, right? And so if you're in the middle of a drawing or in the middle of playing an instrument, people can get into that flow state, which is a very positive experience. And there's work done on how you're able to replicate that within a work setting. So that's a way in which you can maximize the engagement that workers experience. And of course, relationships, this is a recurrent theme, right? A lot of the motivation theories touch on relationships, right? And so it's important that, you know, the workplace is not, you know, where your friends are or where your family is, right? And a lot of people think of workplaces like that, but relationships are important, right? And so the workplace has to be a place where you can forge positive relationships, even though they're not, you know, necessarily, you know, your immediate group of friends or your family. You shouldn't think that that means relationships are not important. They certainly are. It's one of the most important aspects of the workplace, the relationships that you're able to develop. And so this spans, all the types of relationships that you might have at work, not only with your peers and your coworkers, which is very important, but supervisors as well. And the degree to which the relationships are toxic and they're negative, that's going to produce, that's going to have a very significant effect on the overall experience people have in that workplace. And so it's very important, right, that people have, these social skills where they know how to effectively interact with others, so that they're generating these positive experiences, right? And they're not contributing to a toxic workplace, right? There's a lot of bad managers out there, right, who, just let their emotions get the best of them, right, and never think of the ways in which the things that they do within the workplace impacts, negatively or positively other people. They're just sort of, in the business of, doling out results, right? And often that means punishing people because they're just dissatisfied with the way people perform, and they never really recognize when people do well. And, this is just a terrible way to manage. It's very ineffective. And so you have to be very deliberate. You have to take a rational approach to the interactions that you have. This is a skill that you can develop, right? Part of this is emotional intelligence, which is something that we talked about, which is understanding your own emotions, understanding how those emotions impact others, and understanding the way people will respond to your emotions. And so all of that plays a very big role. And so, relationships, very, very important. Meaning is something that's also very important. If you work a meaningful job, that could override, a lot of the ills that may otherwise exist within the workplace. And I'm going to end on meaning. That will be the last slide, so I'll get back to that. And of course, achievement. And so some of the things that you can focus on here is it's important for people to use their abilities to their fullest, which is something that we talked about, but also have an opportunity for increasing competence, right? So you want people to be able to develop their abilities within their job, and feel, like they have abilities and skills that are increasing, and that's another way of making the job more satisfying. And so, people don't want to feel as if they are just a cog, in this grand piece of machinery, churning out products and services for some organization, right? They want to think that they're making a human contribution to whatever work is being done within the organization. And so, this work that comes out of positive psychology, and positive, you don't need to know this as well, but I'll just mention it here. Positive psychology applied to organizations. There's a whole discipline built around that called positive organizational scholarship. And a lot of this work began at the University of Michigan. So they have a whole institute and center there dedicated to applying the ideas of positive psychology to the workplace. But for what you need to know for this course, I think ultimately a great way of thinking about how to generate these positive experiences, we can borrow from the work done within positive psychology, in particular, this idea of flourishing, and thinking about ways in which people can flourish in the workplace. And if you can hit on these 5 elements, right, you're going to be making a very strong impact on each of those ways in which we interface, right, with reality, the 3 ways in which we experience the world. And this is sort of a great guide for designing jobs that generate these positive experiences. And I'll end here on meaningfulness, right? And so this is also very important. Some might argue that this will have a much greater impact than anything else that you build into the job. You know, I don't know how much scientific evidence there is for that. You know, for some people, maybe for many people, that will certainly be the case, that having a job that's meaningful will be the most important aspect of the job, the most motivating aspect of the job. It's what generates the most sort of effort and drive to work at that place and work hard. So meaningfulness is certainly an aspect that is very, very important. So meaningfulness here is the sense of belonging to and serving something that you believe is bigger than yourself, right? And what that is, it could be nature, right? And so here you might belong to an organization whose work is, you know, improving the environment, or, I don't know, working with animals, things like this. Social groups, organizations, movements, traditions, belief systems. So, you know, you want to make, the idea here is that you're serving something other than yourself that you think is very important. Often that will be, you know, other people, right? So the bigger impact you have on others and improving their lives, and the number of people you can impact in this positive way will correlate with how meaningful you will think that job is. And so one of the things you want to do is think of ways in which you can make jobs meaningful. And there's ways, creative ways of adding this really to any kind of job that's done. And there's lots of scholars that are trying to do work on this. But an example of something like that would be if you take a job like that you might ordinarily think is not very meaningful, such as, let's say, being a custodian, right? So how can be a custodian, if you work as a custodian, how can you make that, turn that into a meaningful job? One way you can do that is, and this is actually done by some who, you know, work this kind of job. An example was given where custodians in a hospital, right? They think of their job not as just sort of, you know, cleaning the hospital, but being part of, being an important member of the healthcare team, making sure that the environment's clean, because that's going to impact health outcomes, right? So that's obviously a way in which you can orient that job, right, in a way that makes it more meaningful, right? So people who then work that job are, you know, making a meaningful contribution to the well-being of everyone within that hospital. So people will derive meaning from that. And if you build that into the job description and the expectations, right, and you talk about that job. So this is all part of, you know, the work culture and environment that will produce these kinds of outcomes. You know, people who occupy that position will think of that job in that more meaningful way. Another way that you can make that job meaningful is, and this was a part of a study that looked at people who did this kind of work and was specifically looking to make their job more meaningful. What they would do is, custodians who worked in a hospital, they would, you know, because they're going into each of the patient's rooms, they would come to recognize which patients had visitors and which did not, right? And so what they would do then is they would spend more time in these rooms with the patients that didn't have visitors, right? So they would give them, you know, that positive sort of social experience. And, you know, for them, that made their job a lot more meaningful, right? And you can see how that would be the case, because now they're delivering, right, almost a, you know, a social therapeutic benefit. They're not just, you know, sweeping the floors. This is an opportunity while they're doing that, right, to interact with the patients, and they're sort of redesigning their jobs so that they can have this more meaningful impact. right? And so then you want to think about ways in which people can contribute that are outside their normal sort of job obligations that give them an opportunity to do something that's more meaningful. So that's just a couple of examples about how you might think about meaningfulness in the workplace. And that ends our lecture on meaning, and I will see everyone next week.